Hello, I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader, and oh my gosh, I get so excited and anxious about making this list. Seriously, I spend like hours thinking about all the books that I've read this year and like weighing them up against each other. It's like deciding which books to save from a burning building, and I don't know why I make it such a dramatic thing, because when it comes down to it, this is just a list of 10 books that I've read in 2017 that really spoke to me. And yes, some of my choices are by favorite writers, but the new books that they published this year remind me why they are my favorite writers, because they keep surprising, challenging, and delighting me. And some other authors are debut writers, new writers that I've never read before, that totally captivated me. Now, reading isn't a race, but just so I can keep track of how many books I've read, these are some of my favorite books out of 89 which I've read this year. I mean, numbers don't really mean anything. Some of these books were like 800 pages long. I've read some really long books this year, and some of the books were only 80 pages long. But there you go. So to begin with, A Book of American Martyrs by Joyce Carol Oates. This novel is epic, and I don't just mean that it's long, but it brings to life the subject of abortion in such a powerful and heartrending way. It portrays the lives of both an abortion doctor and a pro-life militant Christian, and later on, the lives of their daughters, and the way that their lives have been seriously affected by their parents' conflict. And it does all this in an incredibly empathetic and psychologically insightful way. But what I loved most about this novel is the optimistic way that it shows how people can learn to see past the tragically limited perspective that they've been raised to believe. Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, and I've already talked about this novel in my video highlighting some of the greatest historical novels that were published this year. I think this novel is stupendous at giving us a new view of our history and also our present time. Not just when Abraham Lincoln was president, but the way that class and racial and sexual conflict still exists today. And technically, it's such an incredibly imaginative feat, like no other book that I've read. Although I did find it challenging at first, and I'm sure many people find it challenging at first, to read this novel, which is essentially like a play script, but also interspersed with nonfiction and imagined nonfiction. But once you get into the rhythm of this novel, it is a complete joy. Dear friend, from my life, I write to you in your life by Yiyun. It seems like every year I come across a nonfiction book that feels like it's speaking directly to my soul. I mean, last year that was Olivia Lane's book, The Lonely City. And this year it's this book of essays, which is all about the writing life and the reading life and our relationships with the minds of authors, and sometimes with the authors themselves. The title is taken from the notebooks of Catherine Mansfield, and bound up in it is that whole mysterious process where someone takes an intensely personal idea, puts it on paper, and through space-time travel, we readers can experience that happiness or confusion or sadness, and suddenly we feel less alone. Yiyun writes about this magical alchemy so brilliantly. The End We Start From by Megan Hunter. So years ago, I entered this short story competition where we had to limit ourselves to using only 6 words to create a short story, after Hemingway, where, he famously wrote that sort of novel in 6 words. And my story was I Saw London Before the Flood, and I won the competition. Well, this novel is about just that subject. A pregnant woman gives birth at the same time that London is catastrophically flooded, sending society into chaos. It's basically a post-apocalyptic story, but it's told in the most beautifully sparing, poetic way. So it's not just about the rush of survival, but about the odd, self-enclosed world of family and a refugee crisis. Ironically, people from a first world city must scramble for sanctuary in places which are less economically prosperous. This debut novel is bold, original, and so memorable. Such Small Hands by Andreas Barba, and it's translated from the Spanish by Lisa Dillman. This is another short novel that I picked up on a whim in a bookstore, and it totally floored me. It includes some of the most piercingly accurate descriptions of childhood I have ever read. Like, not the saccharine imagined memories we have of childhood, but the real experience of it. Some of the only other books I've read that have done this are the first part of Hilary Mantel's memoir, Giving Up the Ghost, and also the reflections on childhood that Joyce Oates makes in her book, The Lost Landscape. Barba's novel is about a girl who enters an orphanage and her interactions with the girls there. And I don't want to say any more about the plot, so you can discover it for yourself. But it is so eerie and so intense. Tinman by Sarah Winman. I pretty much always write about what I read on my blog, but after I finished this novel, I found I couldn't fully articulate everything that it made me feel. Like, I spent hours trying to write about it and I just couldn't get it right. It was so vivid and emotional. It's the story of a man's friendship and love affair with another man that he grew up with, but also his subsequent marriage to a woman and the relationship that these three maintain with each other or don't maintain. But what I think it's really about, and what it does so brilliantly, is capture the way that the people in our lives that are closest to us don't fit into strictly defined relationships. We use these labels like friend or boyfriend or lover or husband, but really our bond with them is so much more complicated than that. And part of the tragedy in making these definitions is it limits the way that we can express how we truly feel about the people that we love. Our connections with people are ever evolving and shifting and coming together and collapsing. And this novel crystallizes the beauty of that experience. It's amazing. The Parcel by Anosh Irani, and one of the longest and most challenging books I read this year was Arundhati Roy's novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. The opening story of this novel is about a hijra, or someone who is intersex, and I never read about the hijra community in India before, which is made up of intersex and transsexual individuals. And Roy's novel is about so many other things as well. It's this sprawling, fascinating, epic evocation of different layers of Indian society, and I'm so happy that I read it. But part of me longed for a more in-depth story just focusing on a hijra, and that's what The Parcel gave me. It is so moving reading about Madhu's story and the intense dilemma that she finds herself in. I got so caught up reading her dramatic story and about the lives of the other characters in this novel. I feel like it's a cliche to say that a novel is devastating but ultimately hopeful, but that's exactly what The Parcel is. I loved it so much. Winter by Ali Smith. And this is truly the best book to read at Christmas time. Specifically this Christmas time, because Smith is writing in this and her whole seasonal quartet about what's happening in the world today. The story is set all around Christmas. A man brings home a stranger who's posing as his girlfriend to his mother's house, as well as his estranged aunt, who is a political activist. I can't begin to summarize all the ingenious wordplay and references to literature and reactions to current political events that this novel makes. But though it contains all these things, it's also just a beautiful, moving, funny, and uplifting story that wrapped itself around me like a warm hug. A State of Freedom by Neel Mukherjee. This novel has one of the most arresting and powerful openings that I've ever read. It's so striking and really sets the mood for the novel, which is essentially about the lives of three different Indian characters. Mukherjee writes so intensely and vividly about a wide range of things, from the smells and tastes of cooking to a bear that is made to cruelly perform by a man who is desperate for money, to a woman who is forced to work as a maid, essentially under slave-like conditions. Yet there's an overarching theme about the degree to which we're able to invent our own lives and futures, but also the limitations that we come against. It is gripping, masterful storytelling. When I Hit You, or A Portrait of the Writer as a Young Wife, by Meena Kandasamy. I read this novel really recently, and I'm always nervous about holding a book up and saying like, yes, one of the best books of the year, when I've only just read it. You know, because it's so fresh in my mind that I don't have any distance from it yet. but I'm certain that this is a truly great novel about a woman who's reflecting on her horrendously abusive marriage and her unique position as someone who is a highly educated feminist and who found herself in this position. And the thing about it is, when we know that, most of us already start making judgments about her. One of the great things this novel does is show why and how women are put on the spot for testifying to the fact that they were abused. She writes how sometimes the shame is not the beatings, not the rape. The shaming is being asked to stand to judgment. This novel is told in a way that feels partly like an essay form in the many insights that it makes, but it also really drew me into the heartrending journey of its protagonist. It's so powerful. There are my choices. Links to my full reviews are below if you click show more. Let me know what you think about these books if you've read any of them, or if you're now enthusiastic about reading any of them. Also, let me know what your top books of the year have been. I love reading and hearing about books that have blown you away. So comment below and let's chat. Please subscribe to my channel if you don't already do so and you want to hear more of my thoughts about books. I'm sure I'm going to be reading a lot more in 2018. But Happy New Year and happy reading, book buddies. I'll speak to you again soon.